Hello everyone, I'm Carius, and my blaster is too big for my camera. So this is my double mega Caliburn, also known as a second degree burn. So this is a second degree mega burn. As you can see by the giant magazines, it fires mega darts. It's running two K25 springs, which gives it a pretty crazy prime. Not as bad as two K26s would be, but it's still a lot. And it shoots mega darts out of both barrels at 150 FPS, and it's pretty crazy. So let's talk about the journey of putting this thing together. So I ordered the hardware kit probably like 2 years ago at this point, a while ago, and it's just been sitting in my basement waiting for me to have a working 3D printer again. So when I finally put the Prusa together, I started printing and got all these parts all printed out and finally put the thing together. Quite a few parts have been printed multiple times as I screw things up and learn how this all needs to work. It was a pretty straightforward process putting the whole blaster together. The files I had for the second degree mega burn I had downloaded when I ordered the hardware kit, so they were so old that Captain Slug hadn't updated this front part so that it actually engages with the barrels. So the screws that came with the kit were too short with the piece that I had printed, so I've since reprinted that and that worked. I had to edit the design of the Sears because they just were not catching consistently at all, and when they did catch, like when I ended up like wrapping a bunch of rubber bands around the entire back of the blaster to try to give the Sears some more tension, they would both catch and it was impossible to fire just one side of the blaster. Like if you managed to get one of them to release, both of them would shoot no matter what, which was super annoying. So I ended up editing the files for the Sear so that it had more catch surface. Here's actually the front part, the old version that didn't work, and you can see there's a recess here for the screw so that the screw goes in deep enough to engage with the barrels, whereas the old one didn't have that, and the screws didn't actually go far enough. So this piece is just garbage, and that was my fault for having outdated files. But the Sears, the original Sears, you can see they have this kind of slope upward, and then really the plunger is only catching on this little point at the end of the Sear for some reason. Whereas, I don't know if you can see here at the Sears, I edited the files so that it's just flat across instead of having this weird downward slope chamfer for no reason. So it engages the plunger more positively, and it just works way better. And you can also see on the original Sear piece that I had, it was already starting to get sanded down and destroyed just by catching and releasing the plungers. Like it's starting to chip away at this tiny point that it was using to catch, whereas I've got almost no signs of damage on these flat-faced ones at all. So that was a huge improvement. So once I finally got that working, I was having a lot of leaks, so I ended up replacing the O-rings. That is a hefty prime, especially when you're at an awkward angle like that. Ended up replacing the O-rings on the ram part with some thicker ones, because it makes sense to have a slightly looser O-ring on the plunger, because you're going with that floating O-ring style thing where just the force of the plunger moving forward will push the O-ring back against the actual sealing face of the plunger. But the ram seal doesn't have that. It's not moving while you're sealing it. So the original O-ring that comes with the hardware kit for a Caliburn is a little leaky and doesn't have a nice seal on the ram like this does, and it adds a little bit of friction, but it the performance improvement you get from the better O-ring here is huge, so it's definitely worth it. And also the rams themselves, the inner diameter of the actual rams is a decent amount smaller than the inner diameter of the barrels, so you get a lot of air leakage in the gap between the barrels and the rams. You could fix that with a different file that had a channel for an O-ring at the end there and just seal it that way. And that might be what I do if this solution I have ends up failing. But right now I've just got 2 layers of electrical tape wrapped around the very end of the ramrod, and lubricate it so that it doesn't get caught on the barrels. And that actually creates a perfect, not perfect, but really nice seal with the barrels. And with how it's set up currently, this will shoot mega darts at 150 FPS, which is really nice for a K25 and a pretty big scar barrel that we've got on the end here. So something I found on Thingiverse while building the 2nd degree mega burn, somebody had made mega scar barrels for the Caliburn, and that was just a separate file on Thingiverse, and so I printed 2 of those and stuck them on here. And the accuracy increase on the AccuStrike mega darts, which, you know, there's been a huge increase in accuracy with these scar barrels. They're just like these 6-string scars that are pretty simple, straightforward. They just have a hole in the back and a string to these notches in the front. They're just friction fit onto the end of both barrels. But the accuracy increase has been huge with these darts. And in order to actually fit the scar barrels on here, I had to make a edited muzzle file that kind of chopped a piece of it off. And I could have just cut it with the bandsaw, but I didn't want to have this exposed infill right here. So I just made a new file with room for the scar barrels. So you can see here's the normal muzzle for the double. Well, I think this is actually for any 2nd degree burn. This is what I had on here to start with, and I just changed the file so that it stops here where that notch is, and removed the kind of flared ends, so that I just had the extra barrel jutting out to put the scars on. When I first put it together and started firing it and testing it, I was really shocked at how much these darts were actually deviating through the air. This is the first time I've ever seen AccuStrike Megas just kind of flying wherever they felt like an elite dart almost, because it had hit the point where it's enough power coming out of this Caliburn that they were just not able to stay accurate just from the weight of the dart anymore. And the moment I added these scar barrels on, it was a dramatic improvement. Now this thing fires laser straight with these darts, so it was a pretty big deal. It could also be that there's just enough of an FPS drop from the scar barrels that the mega darts no longer have too much power behind them for them to fly straight anymore, but whatever it is, the scar barrels have made this thing laser accurate, which is really cool. So I don't know if you can see on camera, but there are a couple pieces on here that are split open. First one is right here. You can see where the Sears are connected, and you have this bolt going through. Normally you just have a screw going into the Sears on either side. This immediately, just tightening that countersunk screw into the part of the grip here, split that open on both sides actually, the very first time I screwed it in. And it hasn't been bad enough for me to have to reprint this part yet, but that was kind of annoying. So I ended up just putting a longer screw all the way through this part with the Sears and putting nuts on the end, kind of to act as washers, just to give it a little more surface area and not drive the countersunk screw into the 3D printed space for it. It was just really easy to over tighten it and split the part right along the layer lines there. So it's kind of a band-aid fix for something that really needs just either a beefier printed part or just a different hole there. Maybe a flat screw instead of a countersunk screw with not a countersink divot for it, because that just immediately split open. Oh well, it's working so far. We'll find out if it holds up. And here, this is one of the weirdest design quirks about the 2nd degree mega burn that I'm not a fan of, and I understand why he did it. It's this, you have this piece jutting out back here to attach the rod. This whole thing is like shifted backward, and that's because he's using the same hardware as a regular Caliburn in the mega burns. So in order to use the same hole positions, he shifted these backwards and then added this kind of slot in the front of the main magwell block for that section to go into. But then you just have this really thin piece of plastic jutting back, and of course it's printed with the layers this way, so it's even weaker. And the forces are all compressive, so it's not going to be like breaking it normally, but just the act of taking this apart and putting it back together a couple times ended up shearing both of these pieces right off. And I have them bolted on here just as kind of a cosmetic thing at this point. But this is completely, this piece of plastic is separate from the rest of the pump. And it's kind of like, it is still functional because this is pushing back and these are still connected and pressing back on this. So it adds a little bit of a structural support for priming it, but the fact that this piece is just so flimsy and barely connected to anything is just really annoying. And I would rather just have a longer metal bar with the holes moved forward, so like bespoke mega Caliburn bars instead of using a regular Caliburn bar and designing it that way. But it makes sense from Captain Slug's perspective because he wants to use the same bars for all the Caliburns, but it's just a really janky part of the design. And also the assembly for this seemed to indicate that there was no screws connecting these bars into the middle plastic piece here, which seems to me like it's just a recipe for breaking something, because you're only priming it by pulling the outer bars back and the middle ones can just float. So I do have a bolt going from one bar to the other right here, with this weird nut that I ground down so it was a little rectangle that could fit in that slot, so that at least gives it a connection to the inner bars so that you're not pulling things asymmetrically. And there's a hole on the inside of the part for that, it seems, but it was really unclear on the Mega Burn whether you're even supposed to be able to put screws there or not. So that was kind of strange. Oh, and another thing, and this could just be an issue from years ago that Captain Slug has since fixed, but my priming bars were not threaded. I had to get my own number 10 tap and thread the holes myself for these screws, because they were just drilled and not threaded. And that they have to be threaded because you're screwing these screws into them. So that was really weird. So it's currently broken here and here, but it's working at the moment, and I'd rather not reprint pieces if I don't have to, so I'll just see how it holds up. The cool thing about just printing the whole blaster yourself is that if something breaks, you can just reprint it. Aside from those minor gripes, the whole thing went together super nicely. It was really fun to build. I like the design, and the Sears was like, it's a cool design that makes sense. It's just, I don't know why he had this weird pointy catch surface instead of just flat across, so it can engage with the plunger across the whole catch. And I think actually, after seeing the edits that I've made to mine, Captain Slug is probably just going to use these files as the second degree burn catches from now on, because they do seem to work much better. So one last note before I test fire this thing that was a real disappointment, to be honest. I ordered some metal ramrods from Slug, and you can see they're not in the blaster right now because I decided the plastic ones are actually better. For one, as soon as I opened the package with these in it, I saw they were just covered in burrs and jagged metal bits all over them, like they weren't cleaned up very well. So I ended up taking a Dremel to them and kind of polishing them on the edges and cleaning up all the burrs so that it didn't have all those sharp bits sticking out on the ramrod. But that's not a big deal. Like, I can look past that kind of small thing. My problem was when I actually went to assemble this and put the ramrods in the bases, and then I attached the priming bars to the sides. Both the ramrods were super crooked. Like, after threading the screws into the holes in the ramrods, they were crooked enough that you had one priming bar coming out and the ramrod was touching it, and the other one was just off to its side. So it was just completely cockeyed, to the point where I was worried it was just gonna try to ram into the side of the inside of the mag wells. Like, they might work with the actual core forcing them straight, but they were so like bent that it was just like, oh, screw this is not gonna work. And I didn't bother putting it together. I also noticed that the dimensions on them were, I mean, they're just the same as the 3D printed ones. There was just as much of a gap in between the barrel and the ram as with the printed ones, and I was gonna have a pretty significant air leak with these, just like I would with the printed ones, and I was gonna end up having to like put electrical tape around the ends of these. So I decided to just stick with the printed ones that were working great and just not bother with these, which is disappointing. It was kind of a waste of money, but oh well. Maybe I will in the future just design my own ramrod that has a O-ring notch and make it a little thicker so that the notch doesn't create a weak point for the ramrod to just snap in half like it used to on the first 3D printed Caliburns. So if I need a better seal with the barrel, I'll just print my own ramrod with a O-ring slot. But for now, the electrical tape on the printed ramrod is working better because the printed ramrod it's a part of this already, so it's just straight by default, and there's not any, you can't get any weird issues where this is leaning to the side, because both of these were just like completely crooked to where they were touching the priming bar on one side. With the ram this long, it probably would have been corrected enough by the actual magwell base to not run into any problems or ram into anything. But I know with a regular Caliburn, if your ramrod is crooked like that, it just rams into the back of the magwell or the front when you're trying to load darts and completely screws up the whole thing. So when I saw that, I just gave up on installing these and put the printed ones back in and called it a day. And now I have a 2nd degree burn, mega burn, with a Pirangle V5 grip. I originally printed default one that's included with the files of the 2nd degree burn, but this version is just more comfortable and looks better in my opinion. Something it's a more updated foregrip that Captain Slug has on his Thingiverse. And the first grip I printed for this had a weird layer shift on one of the red pieces, so the actual part that engages with the Picatinny rail was shifted upward, and the whole grip was crooked to, it was like bent over to one side because it was higher up on this side than on this side on the Picatinny rail, and that was just annoying. So I wanted to print a new grip anyway, and then when I saw he had a better design Pirangle grip here, I ended up printing that. And this was really loose on the Picatinny when I bolted it on here, and I ended up having to add a couple layers of foam tape squished in between the teeth of the Picatinny rail so that this wouldn't like be all rattly. Now it's like really solid on there, but it was kind of strange how it didn't quite match up and engage with the Picatinny rail like you'd expect it to. But yeah, here's a double mega Caliburn. It's a monster, and I'm super happy with it now that it's working, and it's showing me more than any other blaster how out of shape I am after the quarantine and everything, because my arm is killing me from pumping this thing. And I feel like that is not something that would have been a problem, say like end of 2019 when I was more active and hadn't been inside for a year and a half doing nothing. So I need to get back in shape, if for no other reason than to be able to prime stuff like this. And of course, you see I've got these Centurion magazines just because they look cool in it, but really I'm going to be using it with these Tyrant magazines because having 12 rounds on each side is pretty cool. Okay, let's fire it. Alright, I'm all loaded up with 2 Busby Tyrant mags. It turns out if you fully load one of these, it actually holds 13 darts instead of 12, which is kind of cool. So I got 26 darts in my double Caliburn. We'll see what it does in the chronograph. Just shooting one at a time. 142. 143. 144, and I shot both of them that time. 131. 146. 142, 144, 139, 145. Okay, so yeah, mid 140s, which for mega darts is pretty crazy. It's on par with the weird dual stage Moto Strike that I put together. But the main difference between that and this is that this thing shoots laser straight. It's quite a prime though. Okay, I've got it loaded up again with 26 darts, 13 on each side, and we'll see if I can clear the table with the Mega Caliburn. Mostly because I hate my arm or something. Just to get a feel for the rate of fire and the amount of Mega darts you can throw down range with this thing. I keep double firing it, which is easy to do. You gotta really kind of make sure your finger's only hitting one side of the trigger. If you're hitting the other one just a little bit, it's enough for the shock of one plunger going off to set off the other one. And I think I can fix that just by adding a little bit more tension to this piece of elastic that's got the Sears tensioned. But at the moment, it's not a huge deal. I wonder if I had any ammo left. Arm hurts. Oh yeah, I had one shot left on both sides. But just needs a slightly tighter elastic here. Just a little bit more tweaking is needed, but it's pretty mean. So there's my 2nd degree mega burn. Super awesome blaster. It's kind of something that's been on my bucket list as far as mods go. Like, I just really like the idea of a mega firing sniper with a double stage trigger where you prime it once and it's got 2 darts ready, so it's just this crazy repeating boomstick. And I'm super happy with it. I just need to mess with the Sears a little bit more so that it's easier to fire one at a time instead of firing both accidentally. And probably leave it up and make sure the seals are as good as they can be. I feel like I can push 160 with this if I make a few more improvements. But right now 145 is what it's doing, which is pretty good. I'm happy with it. And we got all this carnage, dented and split open cups from mega darts hitting them pretty hard. Yeah, that would have cleared the table super easily if I was more reliably shooting one dart at a time. She probably saw I was shooting both barrels in one shot pretty often. Oh wow, there's a cup that has just been shrapneled. There's half of a cup, and here's a shred of a green one. Might need to replace some of these cups. Alright, well that's it for this one. Just wanted to show off the Mega Caliburn and kind of gripe about the design a little bit. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next one, and until then, this has been Carius reminding you to have fun. It's so pretty. Alright, so it turns out the issues I was having shooting both at once was a combination of this not being tight enough and also just tying one knot in this elastic doesn't actually make it big enough to not go straight through that hole if it's stretched enough. So I've actually temporarily put in these 2 small screws just to keep the elastic in place because it kept slipping all the way through the holes, and then I had to reassemble that and rethread it, which was a pain. But also, if this screw or these screws in the original assembly get loose at all, that extra play in the Sears will make it so that they both try to fire whenever you fire one of them. So tightening this and tightening that made it so that I can shoot it one at a time much easier. So problem solved. It's kind of a weird janky band-aid solution with the little Nerf screws there, but it's working for now. I'll come up with something better. And hopefully I won't have to reprint this, because the splits in this part, I think, are going to cause me some problems. You can see it's split on both sides. It's split way worse on this side. And again, that was just from the countersink screw getting too tight when I tightened it. And it didn't even take that much. It was just I tightened it a little bit and then splat. So now I've just got this weird longer screw with nuts at both ends, just to kind of hold it all together without the countersink surface pushing this split apart farther. Anyway, just thought I'd do a last second update on that. Just one quick update on the battle cannon. I added these weird brackety things. I ran out of orange filament, so some of them are black. This little part I designed, pretty simple. All it does is let you store magazines on the blaster, and you can store 4 of them, 2 on each side, and they're not really in the way of anything. It just kind of hooks into this little slot from the old deployable front bit and screws onto the top, and you have just a nice simple mag holder. Makes the thing a little bit more practical. A little bulkier, of course, but I like having extra ammo just available on the blaster. Aww. Look at them snuggling. They loves each other. He wants some too? Yeah. Oh, he wants in my lap. Him's a lap cat. Meow. They so sweet.